Hello guys, welcome again to my YouTube channel. Today we will study about sexual reproduction in flowering plants. As you all know, flower is the part of a plant in which reproduction takes place. It is the most attractive and colorful part of the plant. It is the reproductive part of a flowering plant. It may be defined as a modified shoot in which nodes and internodes are highly condensed. So let's talk about different parts of a flower. The flower is borne on a stalk-like structure known as pedicel. The swollen end of the pedicel is known as the thalamus. The thalamus holds the four whorls of the calyx. Whorls are the circular arrangement of the different parts of the flower. The outermost and the first whorl of a flower consists of a leaf-like structure called the calyx or sepals. They are generally green in color. It protects the inner floral whorls during the bud formation and also take part in photosynthesis. The second whorl of the flower is known as corolla or petals. Petals are generally bright in color. Its individual segment is known as petal. These are brightly colored with sweet smell and nectar which attract insects. After that, the third whorl of the flower is of stamen or androecium. It is the male part of a flower. After that, the fourth whorl of the flower is known as pistil or carpel or gynoecium and also known as the female part of the flower. So now let's talk about androecium or stamen, that is your male part of a flower, or pistil or carpel or gynoecium, that is female part of the flower. Stamens. It is the third whorl of the flower. It is the male part of a flower. It consists of a thin stalk-like structure known as filament and anther on the top. Each anther lobe contains pollen grains which takes part in reproduction. The fourth whorl of the flower is the female reproductive part of the flower. The carpel is also known as pistil or gynoecium. It is differentiated into three parts. The upper portion, which receives pollen grains, is known as stigma. The long tubular part is known as style. And there is ovary which produces ovules which are known as female gametes. So, based on these, there are two types of flower. First is your complete flower and second is your incomplete flower. A flower consisting all the four whorls, that is your calyx or sepal, corolla or petal, androecium or stamen and gynoecium, pistil or carpel, is known as complete flower. Example: China rose, pea and mustard. And incomplete flower are those flowers in which one or more whorl is missing. That is, in incomplete flower, either your calyx is absent, either your corolla is absent, either your stamen or androecium is absent, or either your pistil or carpel is absent. One or more whorl is missing is known as incomplete flower. Example: flowers of date palm and mulberry tree. Now let's talk about bisexual and monosexual flowers. Bisexual flowers are those flowers which contains both stamen, that is your male part, and pistil or carpel, that is your female part. A flower which contains both stamen and carpel is known as bisexual flower. Such a flower can also be called perfect flower, example China rose. And in monosexual flower, a flower which contains either stamen or androecium, that is your male part of the flower, or pistil or carpel or gynoecium, that is female part of the flower. In monosexual flower, one part is present, either your male part or female part. Example is papaya. So, when the male germ cell produced by pollen grains fused with the female gamete present in the ovules, the fusion of germ cell or fertilization gives us the zygote, which is capable of growing into a new plant. Now let's talk about pollination. Pollination is the process of transference of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Pollination must occur between the plants of the same species. Example, pollen grains from wheat plant should fall on the stigma of wheat plant only. In a field, many types of crops grow together. The wind may blow away the pollens from all such plants, and thus the flowers of a particular plant may receive all kinds of pollen grains. Only the pollen grains of the same type are useful. Insects like bees and butterflies generally collect nectar from all kinds of flowers. In the process, the insects carry different types of pollen grains on their body and transfer them to stigma of plants. Thus, plants receive all kinds of pollen grains, but nature has so designed that only the pollen of the same species will help in reproduction, and the remaining will fail to germinate and perish. So, pollination is generally of two types: self-pollination and cross-pollination. The transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower is known as self-pollination, also known as autogamy. And when the pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma of the different flower of the same plant is known as geitonogamy, and hence it is known as self-pollination. The transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or to a different flower of the same plant is known as self-pollination. In cross-pollination, the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of the different flower of the different plant, but plant is of same species. Transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of the different flower of the different plant is known as allogamy. So this is the main difference about self-pollination and cross-pollination. In self-pollination, there is transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma either of the same flower or to a different flower but of the same plant. Whereas in cross-pollination, there is transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of the different flower of the different plant. There are several agents of cross-pollination. The two commonest agents of cross-pollination are insects and wind. So there are certain terms related depending upon the pollination done by. When the pollination is done by wind, it is known as anemophily. When the pollination is done by water, it is known as hydrophily. Pollination is done by insects is known as entomophily. When the pollination is done by birds, it is known as ornithophily. When the pollination is done by animals, it is known as zoophily. And when the pollination is done by bats, bats are the mammals, so it is known as chiropterophily. So that's all about sexual reproduction in flowering plants and pollination. Thank you.